Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Rabbi Daniel Brenner, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to Anxious Teens. We're very anxious about this webinar starting, but we are really honored to have a guest, Dr. Yoni Schwab, with us tonight, as well as having with us two incredible teens who are going to share their perspective. So just a little bit about this evening. We are going to start with Dr. Schwab, and after that conversation, we welcome your questions. You can put them in the chat, or you can put them in the Q&A. Then we're going to be speaking with our two teens who are going to give us their perspective. And then we're going to bring Dr. Schwab back into the conversation. So it really should be a fantastic evening. I am so cognizant that the new moon is approaching. We just had the beautiful full moon of Elul, and this is a time where we really begin introspection. And today is a particularly powerful day for introspection for many of us who experienced the terrorist attack on 9/11 in New York City. I was in New York City on that day. I think some of the folks who have signed up for this probably were as well. But even if you were not present, really it was something that was unprecedented and really caused us all to rethink what it means to be safe. And also we are really living through a time where there is increased political violence, and that is also giving us a lot of anxiety. So just want to be mindful of the moment that we are in before we begin this conversation about parenting ancient teens, and let everybody know that this conversation that we're having really stems from an earlier Raising Up Teens seminar that we did with the wonderful folks from the Jewish Federation of North America, who did a very big research project with over 2,000 teens that was in 2024. And in the beginning of 2025, one of the things that we learned is that so many Jewish teens are struggling with all sorts of anxiety, mainly because they put a lot of pressure on themselves. They also have a lot of academic anxiety, which is to be expected when so many Jewish teens are planning on going to college. And finally, they experience a dual burden because they experience anxiety around just being Jewish and being in environments where being Jewish isn't always looked on as a positive. So we want to talk about all of those things. Before we do, I just want to say a little bit about the work of Moving Traditions. We partner with schools and camps and synagogues and JCCs and creating teen experiences where teens can explore the core issues of their lives. And we do this by training mentors who can work in micro communities to help teens with their social, emotional, and spiritual lives. We focus on three things, and the Hebrew phrases for those things are shlemut, chesed, and tzedek. Shlemut, a sense of personal well-being and self-awareness. Chesed, a sense of loving kindness and connection to others and the value of living in relationship with others. And finally, tzedek, a sense that the world is not yet where it should be, and a sense that it is up to us to make it a more caring and just world. So tonight, we have Dr. Yoni Schwab. Of course, you could read his bio. It was briefly in the introduction there. But I want to just ask you, Yoni, if we can start with a question. Tell us a little bit about the path that led you to becoming a psychologist, and in particular, the path that led you to becoming a psychologist who works in a Jewish day school for children who are learning in very different ways than the typical children.
Awesome. Thank you, Rabbi Brenner, and thanks for Moving Traditions for bringing me here tonight. So excited to see everybody across the country. So I started out, I have a funny story bringing me into the world of psychology. My mother is an educator by training, and when I was young, and I think my brother was like 6 months old, she, in her part of her education training, took a class on parenting, and she was hooked. She thought that bringing psychology to the science of raising kids would really transform not only her own child rearing, she'd had a difficult childhood herself, but also the, kind of the world. If everyone just raised their kids better, we'd have a better world. And she's very idealistic in that way to this day. And she actually devoted her career to teaching parenting to literally thousands of parents. So my brother and I were raised with this program. We were raised with this approach. There are some very unconventional. At the time, the program was called Systematic Training for Effective Parenting, or STEP. It was actually quite popular in the 70s and 80s. She really did it through the 90s and 2000s. But it had some very some things that were a bit unusual. Like my mom would never tell us that she was proud of us, because that was against the program. So to encourage your kids and cheer them on, but say, are you proud of yourself? And that actually, as counterintuitively, taught us not to rely on others for validation, but to really self-reflect and figure out, were we doing the right thing? And so there are other elements like natural and logical consequences, and really encouraging us to face our fears. And so I think that my brother and I, as much as my parents were, of course, imperfect parents, like we all are, and as I have been in my own child rearing, I think there's a real belief that, psychology and science could really help us do this better. So I
Mm.
went to graduate school, learned psychology, did all the normal things, and I have since been working not only as a clinical psychologist, and I do a lot of parent training, a lot of parent work, a lot of work with anxiety, disruptive behavior, ADHD, those sorts of things. But I also ended up as founders and the assistant head of the Shefa School. Shefa is the first and largest Jewish day school in the world for kids with language-based learning disabilities. So kids with dyslexia, kids with language challenges. These are kids who you wouldn't pick them out on the street. These are kids who are bright, they're fun, they're social, and they really struggle with reading and writing in the language of the classroom. And when they've struggled for too long, their families will often look for alternatives. And there are many secular alternatives out there. I had worked at such a secular school in the past, and it was transformative for these students. I was part of the team that really founded the first Jewish day school in here in New York City for these kids. It's K-8, and we grew from 24 kids 11 years ago to 230 this fall. And so we were growing exponentially. If you're in the New York area and you have a child in that age range who's interested and might need an alternative school, please reach out. And we take in kids who really, mostly from mainstream schools, who have struggled, Jewish day schools, secular independent schools, public schools, et cetera. And then 95% of them return to mainstream schools successfully. So we know that, again, using science, but also really caring and deeply knowing of kids and supporting families can be transformed for kids in lots of different ways.
I love the combination of science and just the menschlichkeit that's required in thinking about what does it mean to be a parent, or what does it mean to be an educator in the school setting. Um, and I want to just take us into anxiety from a science place first. We happen to be approaching the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, and it's a time when traditionally Jews lived and faced fear. Like, am I going to live this year? Am I going to be healthy this year? Am I going to have parnasa, support, financial, am I going to meet my needs this year? Like all the questions, it was a time of anxiety and a time of fear. So how is fear at the root of anxiety? And how do you make space for fear while also acknowledging that sometimes anxiety is just something that we are amplifying in our minds?
Wonderful. So let's just start with what fear is and what that's all about. And then we'll talk about kind of anxiety and worry and all those other pieces, all those connected ideas. Fear is a very elemental emotion. It's considered, there's a debate about whether there are basic emotions or not, but if there are, it's one of the six basic emotions. And every human being in the world experiences fear. Every vertebrate and most animals, and even potentially some plants, experience fear, right? This is something that is core to being alive, certainly to being human, but frankly to being alive. And the reason is very obvious. Without fear, we'd all be dead, right? Our ancestors would have been, you see the saber-tooth tiger walking across the savannah. If
I'm
you're
going the other way.
if you're not afraid and you're like, yeah, whatever, I'm just going to walk past, I mean, you're going to get eaten and your ancestors would not have lived. So fear is absolutely necessary and crucial for human flourishing. And for that reason, we have, it's not bad. It's part of who we are. And so that's something that we need to learn how to embrace and to live with, even though it can get out of control. And so how does that lead to different words around fear? For me, and people try to slice and dice different kinds of fear in different ways. I think those are probably all a little bit I don't find them as necessary, but people say that fear is that immediate fear of like that saber-tooth tiger, or you might get hit by a car, and so you have the fear in the moment. Anxiety, often people say, is about something in the future that you're anticipating. Worry is something imagined that you're kind of thinking about and over again that might happen in the future. But ultimately, they're all about the concern that you could be in danger and hurt, or something you could lose something in the near or long future. Right? You haven't lost it yet, right? You haven't been eaten by the saber-tooth tiger yet. You haven't failed the test yet. You haven't lost the job yet, but you might. And so that fear is what comes in. And that's really important, because without that fear, and fear is just is a version of the sympathetic response, which maybe you learned about in Psych 101, which is when your heart starts beating faster and your lungs start breathing in and your muscles get tense because you're ready for three things: flight, fight, or freeze. So first you freeze.
Sure.
You say, okay, I need to figure out what to do. And by the way, if I don't move, the saber-tooth tiger can't see me, because a lot of predators can't see when you don't move. So that's why we freeze, but we also need to think what to do next. And then we either have to fight off the tiger or we have to run away from the tiger, right? Those are our choices. And so that's what we're doing. And that's going to be the same thing when you're taking a test, when you're giving a presentation at work, when you're trying out for the softball team. So when you're doing all those things, you need to first freeze, think, what am I going to do? And then hopefully you're going to bring that energy, that extra blood that's flowing through. The muscles are strong. You're ready to go, and you're actually going to bring that energy of that anxiety to that moment. Or you're going to run away and say, you know what, I'm not going to try out for the team. I'm not going to take that test. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes avoidance is a really good strategy. I'm afraid of touching that fire. Good. Don't touch the fire.
Sure.
It'll really hurt you. So be afraid, pull away. That's avoidance. The challenge is when anxiety defines how you are, and you start avoiding things that are important, that are valued, that are helpful to you. Making a new friend, studying for the test, trying out for that softball team, giving the presentation at work, that actually would be good for you to try out. And if you're willing to, and that avoidance is when we really get into trouble. The optimal amount of fear is not no fear. It's also just not too much fear. One of the original findings of psychology back in 1896, when the field was brand new, was called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And it's a silly name, but it just meant a curve like this. And it said, if your fear is too low, you won't really try. You might fall asleep during the test. If your fear is too high, you'll freak out and forget all your answers. If your fear is in the middle, you have to find that Shvil HaZahav, that kind of golden mean, then you can actually perform well. And there's some real research that's recent. There's a great book that I want to recommend to your parents, and then I'll pause for the next question. David Yeager recently published a book called 10 to 25. Have you heard of it? It's about really
Oh, yeah.
understanding adolescence. And I started the book thinking, I'm a psychologist, I know adolescence very well. I was like, but I learned new things, and I really appreciated this book. He really brought together a lot of good research. And one of the things he added that I really appreciated is they've done some research on when you tell a kid or an adult saying, look, I know you're afraid. We've always said, I know you're afraid. If it's important, face your fear. We've known that for a long time. They said it, he added something. He said, the research says that not only do you say, they say, you know what? It's not that your fear is in the way. Your fear is actually your superpower, because your fear is what energizes you to respond well to the situation. If you didn't have that fear, you wouldn't have the energy to fight off that tiger, or to study for the test, or to really focus and be on for that presentation, right? If I didn't feel a little activation right now, I'd kind of be limp and boring, but I feel a little energized. So that allows me to hopefully be entertaining and not let all of you fall asleep tonight. So that fear is really important. And if we can change that idea in our culture that fear is bad to fear is important, but just make sure that it doesn't overwhelm you, so you still do what's really important to you, then it supercharges us.
I understand that. I want to make two comments. One is I love that you talked about the Shvil HaZahav, this idea of the golden path or the means. One of the things that we use a lot with our teen education programs and moving traditions is Maimonides' idea of balance. Like, you don't want to be somebody who's too quick to anger, and you also don't want to be somebody who's too slow to anger. If you're too quick to anger, you'll have no friends. And if you're too slow to anger, people kind of pick on you, and it's going to hurt. And thinking about the balance, like thinking about getting that just right, like, okay, I'm angry when I need to be angry, and I can be calm even when other people are angry. Like, how do you get that balance? It's like a question that we all have to face. So I love that you're bringing in that part of the conversation. Really drawing on a spiritual and a Jewish text in this framework. But I want to ask you
By
about
the way,
what,
that's backed up by research, right?
yeah.
One of the things I love is when, and this happens all the time, as someone who loves Jewish text and loves Jewish learning, to see when ancient wisdom, which I really hold, is ancient, and so there's a reason why it's been, it's been sanctified by time because we've really held on to that wisdom for so long, matches up with current day, database research. So empirical research. So that's a perfect example. There's been a concept in psychology now for 30 or 40 years around assertiveness. And assertiveness is the Shvil HaZahav. It's that golden path or golden mean in between aggression, which is I care about me, but I don't care about you, and so I'm going to take advantage of you, and passivity, which allows you to, people, take advantage of me, but I don't really stand up for myself. And so assertiveness says I both need to care about my own needs and the other person's needs. That's the best way to be effective in the world. And so it's literally just, a modern, and there's research support this, that just reinforces what we as Jews take from our legacy of, 900 years of Rambam, of Maimonides' wisdom.
I love that. I also love that, in parenting talk, there is this idea that the authoritative parent is what you're trying to be, which
Mhm.
is like exactly that, which is that right in the middle. So I want to just talk about a lot of the teens that I've experienced really over the last decade in particular. You have teens now, some teens who maybe they have a little bit of anxiety, but they've gone down a rabbit hole in Reddit and they've decided that they have like an anxiety disorder that needs to be treated immediately. And, they've come up with all the answers themselves after, maybe a couple of hours of research. Like you have some of this happening right now. You also have teens who are like, I do not want to be labeled. And they may have an anxiety disorder and it may be very severe, but they are just pushing away from being labeled or being diagnosed or anything like that. So I'm very concerned with what parents do when they have teens in these kinds of situations. So one of the things that I think about more than just language is I think about what are the physiological signs that a parent should look for, whether their child is truly stuck in an anxiety place and really, as you said, preventing themselves from doing some of the things that they may have some fears around, but they really should muster up the courage to do. I know that in the world of calming anxiety, there is now a new embodied approach. So, for example, they say to anxious teenagers, look at three things in the room. Now listen to three sounds in the room. Now move three parts of your body, like trying to ground yourself back into reality. What do you say when you have parents and they're not sure if their kid is anxious to the point that they need support? Like what do you tell them to look for on a physiological level?
So I can tell you what to look for physiologically, but that's not how I would suggest you make any decisions. So physiologically, the difference between typical anxiety, fear, worry, and pathological or kind of dysfunctional fear or worry, are the same. It's just it right. It's again and every kid's different. Every person's different. We call it a feeling fingerprint, right? Every person is a different combination of your heart's racing, you're taking, you're having deep breaths, or your breathing is shallow, your shoulders are tense, you might have a headache, you're sweating, your sweaty palms, your muscles are tense, you feel things in your stomach. All these things we know, and some people feel more than others. For me, my anxiety, when I feel really anxious, it appears right here in my throat. Can't tell you why,
Mm.
but it sticks in my throat, right? So that's for me where it
Mm.
really feels the most. And everyone's different. So you can look for that in your child, but actually their physiological signs are not the concern. Anxiety will not kill you. And you can have a pretty robust anxiety response and still not have an anxiety disorder. And you can have a pretty light physiological response and have an anxiety disorder, because the way that you determine whether something's a problem is always by function. Is this getting in the way of important things in this child's life? Is this getting in the way of important things in an adult's life? Right? So if there's a kid who feels really anxious, but still self-advocates with the teacher to, be able to use a computer in class. This is an example from someone I talked to this evening. Their 11th grade daughter is very anxious about approaching a teacher to self-advocate. And they're saying, what should we do? Should we call a teacher? And I was like, no, 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 don't call the teacher. The child has to email the teacher, talk to the teacher, figure it out. But if they really want to use a laptop in class because it'll help them to take notes, great. But they've got to self-advocate. And it doesn't matter how anxious they feel, that's not what's important. What's important is that they do it. So if they felt not anxious a lot and did it, great. If they felt very anxious and did it, also great. Because the more they do it, the more they're going to learn to be functional with whatever that feeling is. So it's really about looking for, is your child's life, are they able to do things that are valued to them and to lesser extent to you with their anxiety on board or not? Or are they not able to do them? And is it getting in the way? Not, I shouldn't say able. Are they choosing not to do them? And that's all that is about. It's all about avoidance. If your child is again, it's not avoiding, I have a fear of heights. That's one of my fears. And so mostly I don't have to go places that are high, right? I don't mind going in an elevator, that's fine. So, and I don't mind being in a building where I'm closed in. But do I have to go like, climb a side of a mountain where I can look over a cliff? Like, I don't really have to do that. So is that a big deal? No, it doesn't really get in the way of my functioning. But then, I don't I had twins who were 11, and we went to Busch Gardens in Virginia. And they're like, we want to go. And we'd always go on the middle, we go on the little to middle level roller coasters. And I liked those. They were fun and exciting, but the big ones with the loop-de-loops and the big drops, no way. Too afraid of heights. But then they started going on them and they're like, I want to go on bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones. And I'm thinking, do I have to go on it? No, I could sit at the bottom, but I was thinking, well, my value is to show my kids that you want to face your fear. And I am a psychologist who always advocates that. So here I go. So I have to say, over that day when they were 11, I went from, the baby ones all the way up to the big drum with the 250, 250 foot 90-degree drop. And I was terrified. If you had asked me physiologically, oh yeah, you would have gotten all the signs. But you know what? I did them all. And now when I go back with them to a park, we can enjoy those together and sit in the front row and put our arms up. And I'm still terrified, but I do it. And so that's the kind of thing that we want to learn to do, is that, yes, that it wasn't important to me before, but when my kids started doing it and I wanted to be with them on that experience, I learned to do it. I was just away with my wife, just the two of us, and we were sitting somewhere where it was like a ledge. You could sit like on the walls, like a short wall, and the ledge was like 25 feet down. And it was much more comfortable. It made more sense to sit on the edge looking out and look out at the beautiful vista. I sat there for like 25 minutes and my wife's looking at me. She's like, why aren't you enjoying this? I'm like, this is so scary, but I'm doing it.
Everybody's looking out at the beautiful view, and you are just like, oh my God, I gotta
Oh
get
my God, what if I fall? What if I jump? What if but I did
right.
it. I did it. And she took a picture of me. She thought it was hysterical. So
Well,
this is what we do in our lives. I'll tell you
Yoni,
one more example of
thank you for talking about your own anxieties. I
I'm happy to.
appreciate that.
Well, I'm not immune. None of us are immune. Thank God. I think I have an anxiety. Otherwise, I would probably be dead. I'll tell you one more example from when one of my oldest one was, let's say 4 or 5. I think it was maybe probably 4. And we figured it's time for him to transition from baths to showers, right? It's really from, he's old enough to take a shower, and he was terrified of showers. So I could have said, he thought that all the water coming out was like little needles and that they would hurt him.
Oh,
And we would tell him like, no, no, they don't hurt, but he wouldn't believe us because he's 4. So I said, look, we could have said, you have a showering disability. You don't have to shower. And then when he got to camp, we could have been like, he can't shower. But that's not how we roll. We said, oh, okay, you're afraid of showering? That's fine. All you have to do is come into the bathroom. Fine. He stood by the door, as far away from the shower as possible. I turned the shower on, put my hand in, and see, doesn't hurt. Actually feels kind of good. Comes over a little bit, eventually puts his hand in. 2 days later, he's in the shower. Guess what? He's 22. He lives in Israel. And he still showers. He probably doesn't shower often enough, but that's a different problem. And so,
okay, yeah, that's a completely separate thing, and that's
so
that's another personal thing. Okay,
exactly. But
but
this is how we, this is the task of childhood all through. And it starts with little things like showering when you're 4, and big things like self-advocating when you're 11th grade, or going to the bat mitzvah party when you're 12 and you don't really know everybody. And by the way, not taking your phone. We can talk about phones at some point. And really, that's part of the task of childhood, is to do these things that are new, that are really terrifying. And you can validate, oh my God, it is really scary. Totally. But I'm going to validate the feeling. I'm not going to validate the avoidance.
so you're raising something that I think about a lot, which is Parenting has changed. And a lot of times when I speak to parents, they value their friendship with their children. And part of that friendship is that their children tell them, like, I'm really anxious about this. Is there a way that I can not do this? And parents are often in a position where they're like trying to support their kids in not doing certain things. Like, so I want to just ask you, as somebody who sees a lot of parents interacting with their children, like, how in some cases do parents make the anxiety worse for their teenagers?
So there's a great program that I encourage parents to look up called SPACE. It's developed by a professor at Yale called, his name is Eli Lebowitz, believe it or not, with a name like Eli Lebowitz. He's Jewish,
Oh,
believe it or not. And anyway, but this is taken by storm, this program. It is an offshoot of CBT. So I'm a cognitive behavior therapist, CBT. CBT is the research-based treatment for a number of disorders. Anxiety, first and foremost among them, also disruptive behavior, depression, things like that. But actually, anxiety is what we actually do the best. And SPACE is an offshoot of that. And it's fascinating. What he does is he says, look, if you have a kid who's not willing to, and the whole thing with CBT, as you hear me alluding to, is about exposure. It's about facing your fears. Everything else around it, everything else you do to support that is just in service of facing your fears. And when you learn to face your fear generally goes down. But even if it doesn't go down, you can still do it anyway, and you can still function with your fear. That's the whole treatment, and it's incredibly powerful. What Dr. Lebowitz added to that is he said, look, let's say you have a kid who's really refusing, or let's say, it's not even that big a deal that you're going to bring them to therapy. What SPACE says is actually, this is your job as a parent. There's two things that parents do wrong, he says, and this goes back to authoritative parenting and
sure.
assertiveness and Rambam and Maimonides. He said the two things parents do wrong is they either do a demanding statement. What's the example? The example is going to the bat mitzvah party, or putting your hand in the shower, or the other example that he gives, which I think is really cute, is this is for a young child, I guess, is a child who's afraid to have the windows open because a robber will come in. Any task of anxiety in childhood. And what you do is you could say a demanding statement. Get over it. We're keeping like there's nothing going to happen. We're leaving the windows open. Just go to the bat mitzvah party. Whatever. Get over it. I'm throwing you in the shower. And that might actually eventually work, but it doesn't help the relationship. And often kids will freak out more and really give you a hard time. So that's one thing that we see parents make a mistake. The other mistake that we see actually, frankly, more often in America, where we have right in our Declaration of Independence this idea of the pursuit of happiness, probably one of the worst things that was ever written. We talk about that because pursuing happiness usually leads us to be miserable. Happiness is really a byproduct of a life well lived. That's a much more Jewish idea than it is about pursuing it by itself. But because we think that our job as parents is to make our kids happy all the time, and therefore we don't want to allow them all those difficult things that actually make them resilient. We make them kind of miserable. And so the other thing we see is that parents overly support, and they overly, kind of cater to, and they say, oh no, honey, you don't need to take a shower. It's okay. You can keep taking a bath. Oh no, honey, you can stay home from the bat mitzvah party. It's fine. I see you can't do it. And you're not only, kind of reinforcing the avoidance, you're also communicating to your child that they can't. And that there's something that not only are they feeling anxious, they're for sure feeling anxious, but that they also can't overcome it. He prescribes a different approach. He says, here's the supportive statement. The supportive statement validates and then says you can do it. It goes like this. Wow, I see you're really anxious about keeping the windows open, taking a shower, going to the bat mitzvah party, advocating with your teacher, taking this test. And I know you can get through it. And then what you don't do is accommodate. You don't close the window. You don't let them, escape from showers forever. Maybe you build up to it slowly. You say, you RSVP to this bat mitzvah. I'm taking you. You say, I'm not advocating for your teacher for you in 11th grade. I can't force you to do it, but I'm here to help you write that email. I'm here to help you rehearse that conversation. And it's up to you if you want to advocate with your teacher. And so you are basically not, and that's the thing that we tend to see the most in America is that parents accommodate the anxiety, and that is what makes it worse.
Yeah, I just saw another one of these things where they was one of these softwares that monitors whether a kid turns in their homework. And this year they decided to change alert to a feedback update. And it was like another one of those moments where like they're just like these kids can't face any anxiety. So we need to like again avoid just allow things to avoid. We're getting a ton of questions in the chat now, which is wonderful. And I think I want to just shift over to some of these questions because I think that they're really compelling. I mean, one is, what are you seeing going on with parents and their anxiety and the way that parents are parenting? Do you feel like more anxious parenting is contributing to more anxious young people? Is that something that you feel is an accurate way of thinking about the moment we're living in right now?
Can I just say yes?
I think you're allowed to do that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that we as a society become very anxious, and we are and I for me the root is and I just saw one of the people who was posting a question was Dr. Steve Kurtz, who I just want to call out as actually one of my teachers in this field.
Oh, amazing.
So
Great. Hi,
um
Steve.
so I so yes, 100%. And we know this from research. We know from research that anxious parents tend to lead to more anxious kids. It's both the genetic loading, right? We know anxiety to some extent is genetically loaded, and we also know that anxious parents are much less comfortable with their children being uncomfortable. In fact, Dr. Kurtz once gave me a button that I had on my jacket until it fell off that said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That is like words to live by. And so the more and what I
Nice.
find is that we for ourselves understand that we need to do that. But it is so much harder to make our kids do that. And so much harder to see our kids squirm and see them fail at a test or to see them uncomfortable in a new social situation or awkwardly deal with whatever. And so we jump in and we want to be helpful. And it's all out of love and caring. 100%. It has only good intentions. However, ultimately it's to assuage our own discomfort with our children's discomfort, and it's only to make us feel good as parents because our children are feeling good right now. But it's a very short-sighted process. For people who think about money, it's like if you invested in your 401k and then you just watch the returns hour by hour and constantly moved around. No, you have to take some ups and downs. Like, this is a long-term project, parenting. It's very long term. And sometimes you're going to go through some hard stuff, and the kids going to have to go through some hard stuff. And you're going to have to say, wow, I'm here to support you, but I'm not here to fix it for you, in order for them to develop the resilience and the problem solving to fix it. So that's really the accommodation is really what we see so much from anxious parents, which I totally understand. And when I help them to see that what they're really resolving is their own discomfort with their children's anxiety, they're able to separate and say, oh, you mean I'm not being a bad parent if I let them be anxious? You mean I'm not being a bad parent if I let them fail and have to solve it for themselves? No, you're being a great parent.
Hmm. So there are a lot of questions in the chat. I think we're going to have time to get to those. I want to ask you one last question before we bring the teens into this conversation, because that's really what I'd love to hear what they have to say about everything you just said, but also just about their own experience. So one of the questions that we got from folks who registered beforehand was just a question about what is it like to walk through the world, let's just say walk through North America as a Jew right now, as a Jewish person. And how might a teen be thinking about like all the anxiety connected to being a Jewish person? And like, I'll give you one example that I had recently. I was in a suburb of Los Angeles, not a very Jewish suburb of Los Angeles. I was with a group of about 30 teenagers, most of them, no, actually all of them in public schools. And I did a little four corners things like every person in my school knows I'm Jewish. Most people in my school know I'm Jewish. Some people in my school know I'm Jewish, and nobody in my school knows that I'm Jewish. What was fascinating to me was most of the teens went into the some people in my school know that I'm Jewish, and then talked about why they did not want people to know that they were Jewish. And like how they knew they could trust a friend and say, oh, I celebrate Hanukkah or whatever it was, like a way to say, I am Jewish. The kids who everybody knew they were Jewish had had physical altercations. One kid was Heil Hitler in the hallway. Like those kids had had experiences that were extremely negative around being Jewish. But it was very interesting for me to see how this generation is having this other layer of things to be anxious about. What might you say to a parent who is like trying to like speak to this kind of anxiety? Like, have you done this, and what can be said?
So to summarize, how do we solve anti-Semitism for our teens?
Yeah, right.
I mean, I make a joke only because it's obviously so painful and so jarring for those of us who've grown up in America for so long, where anti-Semitism was never gone, but it just wasn't a huge factor
The
until
people love Seinfeld, you know? I mean, so what did it matter? Right.
I say this as a person who walks around the streets of New York with a kippah pretty much all the time. So I know that I put myself as a target. I know I could take my kippah off and put it in my pocket. I mostly choose not to. When I am in some places, I was in Europe this summer, I wore a hat. My wife was like, wear a hat. So I recognize that. I think there's a few factors to think about. One is to realize, well, we'll get to let's start with the small ones. One is you got to make some smart choices, right? Like if there are places where wearing a kippah is just not going to be a smart idea for your physical safety. And I want to separate out physical safety from emotional safety because I think emotional safety is given way too much play. I think that if we are do uncomfortable things, we can actually deal with a lot. But physical safety is different. And if someone's going to physically
Sure.
attack you or you're at any kind of risk of that, let's be safe, let's be smart. Another piece of this to consider is values. Like, what's the value in this context of letting people know I'm Jewish? Like, if there's not a particular value, like, okay, like, don't do it. Like, don't it's gratuitous then to say like, I'm going to meet you for 1 minute and we're sitting on the subway. By the way, just so you know, I'm Jewish. Like, there's no need for that necessarily. So I think we have to be our values. In other places, it's important, right? If I'm going to be in a relationship with you and we're going to be friends or we're going to be in a program for the summer in an intimate setting, I probably do want to let you know this important part of my identity, just like I'd want you to know if I'm LGBTQ or if I have, something going on with my family that's really important. If we're going to be close, I don't want to, I want to disclose what's important to me with people that I reasonably can trust. So I think you have to be thoughtful about your values and where it's important. This is true about anxiety always. Like, there's certain things that we all don't do out of anxiety, but also like there's none that important. So that's not, it's got to be something that's important enough to do. So that's the second factor. And I think the third factor is to remember the following. And this is where I really want to challenge because this is, I think, not intuitive. Our people's been living with anti-Semitism for 3,500 years, pretty continuously. And sometimes it's worse, including in the last century. And sometimes it's better, as it was, until a few years ago. Never gone, but it's always there. And that's true about xenophobia. That's true about physical danger throughout human history. Human beings have been more at risk of physically being hurt in most of human history than they are right now, right? In America, no one will believe me, but I can show you the FBI data. We're actually at the lowest point of the murder rate since the numbers started being taken in 1960. Our murder rate is lower than in the Eisenhower administration, which is kind of crazy to think about when we think about
I'd
it.
still like it to be a little bit lower, honestly.
We all like it. I like to be zero.
There
But
you go.
like the actual risk to our lives is lower.
Yes.
And the reason I say that is, and here's the crazy part of this, is that we are the most anxious that we've ever been. Our society is the most anxious, the most talking about anxiety. And this is to contrast with all our ancestors who lived through things that were frankly much more physically threatening on a daily basis. All my family's from Poland, and they either came over before the war and because they were pushed out by pogroms, and then I had a grandfather, of course, and of course, sadly, we have a grandfather who survived Auschwitz when most of his family did not. And so, compared to them, thank God, I feel much safer. And yet, I'm much more anxious than he was in a lot of ways, and we're a much more anxious society than those places. And the counterintuitive thing here, and this is a little tricky, is that a lot of things to be afraid of make you anxious, but too few things to make you anxious also make you anxious because
Mm.
you don't build up that resilience. You don't build up the resilience of like things aren't safe all the time and I can live through it. The another version of this is let's take it out of anti-Semitism for a moment. In human history, the child mortality was 50%, right?
Yes.
50% of kids live past age 5. And yet people had lots and lots of kids. They weren't traumatized where they wouldn't have any more kids. And they kind of learned to live with it. They were not happy about it. They were tragically sad, as one ought to be. And yet you learn to live with it it becomes a reality, and you're actually less anxious and less afraid because you're exposed to it. And so in a way, we have to remember that overprotecting our kids from this reality also does them no favors. It's not that we want to put them in danger, and it's not that we want to throw them out there and saying every second that they're Jewish when it's not necessary. but also being real with it and saying this is something that you're going to learn to live with. And if you can face it, face those situations where it is, be uncomfortable, figure out how to be assertive in those situations, or keep yourself safe in those situations. That is the antidote to that is how you respond to fear. The antidote to fear is not knowing that things will turn out well in the future, because that's never the case. We cannot tell the future. The antidote to fear is the confidence that bad things will happen. Life is a series of bad things that happen. It's the confidence that you can deal with it when they come.
All right. I love that as a place for let to stop for this conversation for a second and bring our teens into the conversation. So we have with us today Tova from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and also Lauren from Brookline, Massachusetts. So I want to just start. Maybe let's start with you, Tova. Um, you wrote a piece about anxiety for J Girls Plus magazine, which is now part of the Moving Traditions family. And I know that you are a writer, an editor. You think a lot about a lot of different issues. Tell us a little bit about what led you to write about anxiety, and how your path to thinking about writing that piece and now working on some projects that have to do with mental health. I'd love to just hear a little bit about your journey there.
Yeah, so I believe the piece you're talking about was I've categorized it as a fiction piece. It was a short piece, essentially just exploring someone going through a spiral over. This was about like feeling unloved, feeling like not lacking trust for friends. And that piece that I wrote, I was, I kind of, I felt like I wasn't sure whether to put it as nonfiction, fiction. It was both drawing from my own experiences going through in that time, particularly in that period of time. I wasn't having the greatest mental health, and it was kind of a chronicle of my own feelings, but it was also drawing from a lot of stories I've heard from so many of my friends, some who have diagnosed clinical anxiety, some who don't. Um, but part of what had specifically inspired that piece, um, maybe like a month prior, I had, I was, having some writer's block, so to speak.
Hmm.
And I asked a few of my friends, like, hey, do you have any poetry prompts for me? Anything that you'd like me to write a poem about? And I had a friend come to me and he said, hey, do you think you could write a poem about anxiety? And I said, look, I don't have clinical anxiety. I don't know that like I want to, but I don't know how exactly to do that. And he said, well, let me tell you. So I think we got on like a video call and he talked for maybe 45 minutes about his experiences. Um, and I wrote that poem. It never was published or anything. I just sent it to him. He cried for a little bit, told me he loved it.
Oh,
And when I
beautiful.
was writing this story that Rabbi Brenner mentioned, I was definitely like drawing some from his experiences, but like I said, also my own. And I think language is very powerful. I think it's an important tool. And I think in order to call light on important issues, you need to use the tool that comes most naturally to you. So for me, I felt like English and language was the way to go.
I love that. You know, when we talked on the phone, you were saying that there's so many things that you feel that have contributed to your generation. You're a senior in high school. There's so many things that have contributed to your generation's um, like experience. And like, could you say a little bit of like why you think that there are so many folks struggling with anxiety?
I don't think there's one answer. I don't think there should be one answer. Um, it's the kind of thing where so many different factors work together, they contribute to each other. Um, but just to name a few, I think for one thing, definitely, raising the rising presence of electronics and phones, social media, it creates kind of just an experience, a teenage experience that no generation has had before. Um, and I think it would be impossible not to notice any connections there. Um, I think another factor for sure is school. I don't know that, school has always been stressful. People have always been stressed about it, but in recent years, there's just been an increasing, going higher and higher standards, especially some schools where students are, like feel that they have to take, 6 APs. If you're taking 6 classes that are really designed for someone much older than you, it's only natural that you're going to experience anxiety. And maybe that's the kind of anxiety where, like Dr. Schwab was saying, like, some anxiety is healthy. That's the kind of anxiety that no teen should be experiencing, because if you're taking an adult class, you're going to experience more anxiety than is natural for a teenager.
Yeah, and I want to just say that that shift has just happened like in just the last couple of years, where a few years ago, a number of colleges were like saying, "Oh, we don't need you to take the SAT or the ACT," and and they were just saying it's not about that. And then all of a sudden, all these colleges are back into like, we need to see these scores and we need to see this number of AP classes, and all of a sudden, like the pressure is ratcheted up. So I definitely feel like what you're saying is like reflecting like something that is just in the last couple of years of a amplification of that kind of anxiety. Um, when you think about the way that teenagers talk to each other, what are you seeing in the way teenagers talk to each other about anxiety? What are you noticing? Like, um, I'm interested in that part of your experience.
Yeah. So when someone opens up to one of their peers about their mental health, there's a number of different ways that responses come. Some of those responses are incredibly supportive and uplifting and healthy. Some take a bit of a more negative um, impact on the teen who initiated the conversation. So I've been in so many conversations with friends who have come to me to talk about mental health, come to me and other people, come to talk to me about talking to other people. Um,
Right.
and, to start on a positive note, a lot of times there's a lot of support. There's a lot of, hey, thank you for telling me, like, let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. I'm here for you, like, you can do this, I believe in you. Um, but on the other side of things, sometimes there's a word that I always forget. I think I forgot the same word when I was talking to you originally, but essentially, sometimes in conversations, if one person raises an issue about their mental health, their peer will respond with their own experience in a way that sometimes can be, oh, just relating, sometimes turns into almost like spiraling together, like deeper and deeper, almost like a competition for like who has the most traumatic, experience to share.
Yeah, I think it's called co-rumination, where
Or
like there's
rumination.
there
Thank you.
there's that.
Thank you.
But you feel that that is something that today a lot of teens they'll open up a conversation with a friend about mental health, and it becomes like a competition of who's had the most stress or who's felt the most sad or that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not, I'm not going to say it happens all the time. It doesn't. Most of the time, 90% of the time, people are really lovely. But sometimes, even in an attempt to be like, oh, I relate, instead of that coming across in a helpful way, it just creates an urge to be like, hey, I know you relate, but you don't really get what I'm going through. And
Sure.
then, it's almost like you're invalidating each other's emotions and as a result, you're making each other's experiences almost worse.
Mm, wow. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that part of your experience. So Lauren, I want to turn to you for a second. Um, and Lauren, I want to just say one of the things that I found that was really fascinating about your life is that you're volunteering in a center or senior home. Can you say a little bit about like what that's like and what you find also, just want everybody to know Lauren was part of our Cole Meyer Gottesman Kol Kolenu Feminist Fellowship. So it's wonderful to have you part of this. So Lauren, tell us a little bit about that experience volunteering and what you find in it.
Thank you. Um, I volunteer at Hebrew Senior Life twice, 2 to 3 times a week. And basically, what I do is either a discussion group or basically like a creative arts and crafts group. And basically, it's most of the time it's very light, and I really enjoy hearing other people's stories and like little anecdotes and advice. I do look forward to it because it kind of gives me like a break from being around so many kids my age, and I can kind of just forget about myself and just fully like immerse myself in the conversation and hear these other people without like worrying about myself. And and sometimes we do talk about more serious stuff, which I appreciate, and it's always really nice to hear what these people have to say and kind of compare because it's multi-generational. So I really do enjoy that, and I look forward to it.
I love it, and I love how you just said like it like gives you a break from teen conversation and the pressures of teen life, and I think that's like must be very healthy.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you shared with me when we spoke was that earlier in your life, you did have anxiety to the point where you got some support for it and you learned to develop some skills. I don't want to go into like the details. We don't have to like say exactly what your fears were, but can you just say a little bit about the categories that of the anxieties that you were experiencing and some of the skills that you worked on and how that strengthened you and now from thinking back to yourself as that age and now here you are a senior in high school. Can you say a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I like to think that I've got a lot of skills under my belt. I've experienced lots of different types of like anxiety, especially during COVID. I struggled with like more social anxiety, which makes sense, but also most of it was very irrational and just kind of making up things in my head and then convincing myself that it was going to happen. And some things that I like to do, I know you said like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, doing all that. That's very helpful. Like the mindfulness. And then um I kind of like to do all these things not to distract me, but to kind of relax me. Things like journaling and like watching a funny TV show helps me. Reading, I don't know, anything I like to do, I just like to practice that and just get my mind off of it. And I just wanted to add that you were talking about kind of what parents should do when their kid was expressing anxiety. And I think that one important thing to add, and something that's helped me a lot, is sometimes hearing I know you're anxious doesn't really help me. Like it doesn't really make me feel any less anxious. But something that does make me feel less anxious is when people kind of realize how irrational anxiety is and give me like statistics and facts to kind of like disprove it. Like if your kid is anxious about like a robber coming in through the window, you tell them, we live in a safe neighborhood and that wouldn't happen. And if there were, God forbid, very small chance that it would happen. If it would happen, then I'm here to protect you, and kind of just stuff like that, kind of saying that this is your anxiety and it's not going to happen. Tell them, I don't know, just like facts. That helps me a lot.
It's interesting because you were saying like some of what was happening in your mind was like irrational scenarios and you were thinking through like all the irrational scenarios and it sounds like the parenting response you needed at the time was not like I see you're feeling like anxious, but let's talk through each of these things and let's be realistic about these things and ground ourselves and like you know I guess like okay, let's be afraid of things that we really should be afraid of, but maybe this isn't a thing that we don't have to be so afraid of. Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. I love that. Tova, I see like Lauren is already responding to some of the things that Yoni said. I'm interested in like what were you thinking? I mean, we heard a lot of different ideas, particularly around parenting. What came up for you in hearing that conversation?
Yeah, so a lot of the things you said, I really like definitely agree with. I appreciate, I think are really valuable. There I somewhat I don't want to say disagree, but I think there's room for nuance in like I don't think there's any one way to handle a child with anxiety because I think every child's experience is different. And so sometimes, yes, being like, "Hey, you just got to face your fears, like we're going to do this," is definitely the way to go, but sometimes maybe that's not the time, it's not the child, it's not the circumstance for going and facing your fears and being in a situation that's anxiety inducing. So just a small like personal anecdote. I had emetophobia, the phobia of vomit, for as
Oh
long as I can
my.
remember.
Okay, that's
And
a word I did not know. I learned something
yeah,
tonight.
when I was young, it was very like, I don't want to say crippling, but it was pretty intense. And I mean, I would say my parents in a way fondled me, coddled me, they allowed me when I said like, "Look, I can't do this. I can't be in this setting. I can't eat this food." You know, they didn't push me too hard, and I think that's partly because they couldn't, because if I did, I would probably be like, you know, hyperventilating and crying and just a total
Sure,
mess.
sure.
But like I remember, for 2 years I didn't wear a certain type of dress because I had once thrown up in that same style. And,
Oh
they
my.
they accepted that. Like they encouraged me to do so, but when I couldn't, like it's not important, it wasn't something that I needed to do for daily to day life. And, you know, I bring this up because now, um, many years later, I don't want to say I'm recovered. I'm not recovered. I still have the phobia. I still get anxiety in certain circumstances, but I'm way, like I'm totally able to handle day-to-day life. I was able to be, like I was a cabin leader at a camp I was at with some sick
Wonderful.
um girls in the cabin, and I was able to like be there for them and help them out without being a mess myself. And I
Beautiful.
say this because I think this is an example of how sometimes, coddling is the way to go. Like, look, I don't think I would be in any better shape if I had been pushed into scenarios, made to wear that dress, eat that kiwi,
Sure, sure. Wait, is kiwi another thing? Okay,
a slight thing,
we won't go
a
there.
slight thing, yeah. But like,
But
I don't think
yeah,
being pushed to do things would have helped me, is what I'm saying. And now I am in great shape without having been forced into anything.
yeah, I think from a parenting perspective, the one thing I would want to say about that is maybe your parents saw that you were like dealing with other fears and phobias just fine, and they just thought, you know what, maybe Tova will get around to this one eventually. And like, because I do think there is something about if you as a parent are just enabling your child to avoid all fears, that can be really debilitating. But if you decide, some fears I am going to like push them on a little bit, and some fears like just let that go. Okay, so you're not going to wear that style of dress. Okay, fine, fine, whatever. You're not having the kiwi, whatever. Like there's some certain things you just say let go, and certain things you think, you know what, this could really get in the way of them, learning or making friendships or um, finding ways to serve others and all the other things. So I think you have a great critique. I'm not taking away from the critique, but I think maybe I would hope that parents can find that balance of like when to push and when to just say, okay, this is going to be a thing. So Dr. Schwab, I don't know if you had a chance to hear a little bit of this conversation, but I'd love to bring you back into the conversation just for a second. Here you have a couple of teenagers, who are reflecting on what it is like to be a teen and to be in this conversation around anxiety. What are you hearing in what they have shared, and they actually said a few things about your parenting, guidance. I'd love to just hear a response.
So first of all, I just want to say I really appreciate Tova and Lauren both for sharing your opinions and also for being willing to disagree. That's one of the things I love about teenagers, always willing to be disagreeable. But you were disagreed without being disagreeable, which I appreciated. No, and I think your objections, concerns, different perspectives are totally authentic and totally real. So I wrote a few things down that I would love to kind of respond to, but not to say that, not to say that I'm right and you're wrong, but I would just want to reflect on them. So just on that last point that Tova was talking about prioritizing her emetophobia versus other things, 100%. If like the emetophobia, right, this fear of vomit was making you, okay, so you didn't wear one dress or one set of dresses and you wore other dresses. Okay, who cares? And if you were otherwise functioning well and making friends and doing all the things and there are a couple of foods you didn't like, but you were eating a healthy diet, that's fine. It's not what we're always thinking about is not are you able to do everything, but are you able to do everything that you value? And if you can really come back to what your values are to have friendships, to be kind, to be, to succeed as best you can in school, to maintain good family relationships, to, relate to your Judaism in a way that's value driven. Whatever your values are, and that's a little bit different for everybody, as long as your values are being served and you're able to function within your values and kind of function day to day, and this anxiety over here you're not dealing with, that's fine, right? And no one expects and no one should even try to target every single little anxiety because it's not worth it. It's too much time and effort, and there's too many other important things to do. So Tova, I 100% agree with you. And you were in, what's not uncommon, which is that sometimes you grow out of this stuff, right? Like you had a weird phobia. Like I remember I had an aversion for a long time from egg salad. I couldn't even, not only would I not eat it, I couldn't be in the room with it. And so I
I
made
have
my
one for the tuna salad. That's
Okay,
crazy.
we're
Okay.
matching. So like I made my parents not like make me tuna like they couldn't make egg salad when I was in the room. Okay, so they did that for a couple of years, and a couple of years later, like I got over it. And you know what? I eat egg salad now. So like no harm, no foul. So 100% Tova, I agree with you, and you just have to be strategic. I think the challenge that I think parents fall into is not what you're saying, which is ignoring it, because I think most parents are very happy to do that. It's when something grows and gets really big and your kids not going out of the house and they're so afraid to meet friends and they're so afraid to go somewhere new that like their world gets smaller and smaller and they aren't socializing, or they're so afraid of self-advocating that really they're not able to talk to teachers and get what they need, or they're so worried about that about doing poorly in school they don't study at all, and they start failing out. Okay, now it's become non-functional and really it's really conflicting with that teen and that family's values. And that's where you really need to intervene. And so and you also need to prioritize. Like it could be there's a whole bunch of things that you're struggling with anxiety that are getting in the way, and you can't do them all at once. You got to do one at a time. You got to go slow. Like we're not like, throwing you in the deep end, right? We're not like forcing you to vomit tomorrow. No, maybe we're like reading a little bit about vomiting and that sort of thing. So, we can work on that slowly or ignore it for now and come back to it in a year when you're ready. So I want to totally agree with that and just be thoughtful about be strategic. That was one. Another one that Tova, you said early on, and then I want to get something that Lauren said. You talked in the beginning about what if a friend discloses to you that they have a mental health challenge, and you're really talking about personalization, where some kids can be really supportive of one another, which is great. They can also like bring it into themselves and say, "Oh yeah, me too," and it's all about me. And now the conversations. So that is definitely a problem. I wanted to add something on, and I totally agree with everything you said. The thing I want to add on is totally kind of not related, but it's when kids disclose to their friends or they disclose to a parent that they're really struggling, that one of the things that or it's not a problem with parents, I think it's with friends more so, that what we tend to do is at first we're very supportive and then we pull back. We don't want to bother them. We get a little bit tired of it. And I just want to encourage you that if you know someone's struggling, it's not that you're going in and personalizing and talking about yourself. I agree with you, Tova, but don't give up on that person. Keep going back. Text them every once in a while. Check on them and see how things are doing. Don't let it go, because these things don't usually go away right away. They are rough, man. And they take a long time a lot of times, and people can have ups and downs. And to the extent that kind of move on from that initial crisis and you're not paying attention to it, people can really feel abandoned. But if you can stick with your friends and keep checking in on whatever regular basis and keep in touch with them and show that you continue to care, I think that makes a huge difference. And I think that's something that we struggle to do. So that was just something that Tova. Okay, now let's talk about reassurance, Lauren. One of my favorite topics. So here's the thing. Lauren, can you remind me of the example you gave? What was it that you really wanted reassurance about?
I was using, I think it was your example about
Yeah,
like a
Of the
kid.
the
robber.
window.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's two ways that could go. You gave the more typical response. Oh, you're afraid of robbers? Instead of just saying, oh no, we're not going to talk about it because you're afraid, we're going to talk about it. And actually, that's a form of exposure. We're going to learn about it. Let's look up how often robbers break into houses. How often do kids get kidnapped from their houses? Let's look this up. How often? Oh my God. It happens almost never. Like it happens, it's not zero, but it happens very, very rarely. Is this worth spending a lot of time worrying about? And if you really are have that rational conversation, you do some research online, you really talk about the possibility like, huh, we do lock the doors. Like it'd be pretty hard to break into our house. And what would happen if they broke into the house? Talking it through and thinking it through kind of rationally is very reassuring for a lot of kids. And I encourage you to do that. However, there are times when kids, you can do that 100 times, you can give all the rational things, and it doesn't work. And they're still really anxious about it. So this is a really sad example, but let me give you this example. There was a family I worked with in a school where I think the kid was like in second grade, and the kid kept asking the mom, are you going to get divorced? Are you and dad going to get divorced? And she's like, I don't know what he's talking about. Like, we're not getting divorced. Yeah, we're not perfect, but we're not going to get divorced. And she said, what do I say to him? And I wanted to say, reassure him, say, we're not getting divorced. It's going to be fine. And I said, well, be careful. Because actually, the antidote to anxiety is not reassurance, like it's going to be okay. We actually know that too much reassurance can actually make anxiety worse. And then kids they just rely on others for reassurance rather than reassuring themselves. What you actually want to say is, you know, I don't think so. Like right now, things are great. I can't tell the future, but I hope it'll be, but I certainly hope not. And so you're actually being more realistic and that's actually what's true. Like, I hope we're not going to get divorced. That would be terrible, but I'm not planning to get divorced. I think things are going fine, but I'm being realistic with you in a kind of age appropriate way. I can't promise anything. And that is actually more realistic. And kids then learn not to seek reassurance because they know that like you can't fully reassure them because that's not the future. Fast forward 2 years. The mom calls me. She says, we're getting divorced.
Hmm.
And I was like, I'm really sorry about that. And she's like, yeah, I know. It's really tragic. But I have to say, I really think what you said 2 years ago was really important. Because I did not fully reassure my child, they don't think I'm a liar. They actually, and they're actually more prepared for this not because I was telling them I was going to get divorced, but we said, look, I don't think so, but like I can't tell you 100% because that's how the world works. That actually was in the long term more fortifying in terms of their anxiety than reassurance was. And so, Lauren, I hope and I'm curious how that touches you because it's a little challenging. One of the things that we do with our most anxious kids is we give them the least reassurance. Yes, if you just have a little anxiety about someone breaking in, and you want to get the facts and you want to get out of the way, great. But if that is a persistent anxiety, you actually have to pull back and not give all that attention to that anxiety, which actually can reinforce it and say, well, what do you think? Do you think that's likely? I can't promise it'll never happen, but it seems pretty unlikely. What do you think? And you push it on them for them to reassure themselves rather than seeking that from someone else. And that can help them to really reassure themselves.
Hmm. Going back to the thing we are talking about earlier, just making space for their own voice to come out and their own power and strength to have the courage to face the fear. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
and facing a fear, I want to add, and I just want to underscore this point, is that facing a fear doesn't mean that you're like, there's no facing a fear of bringing a robber into the house, right? We're not hiring an actor to break into our house so our kids get used to robbers in the house. Like obviously that's ridiculous, and terrible. Well, but exposure can be just learning about it, right? Can just be going into it. One of the things that I think is incredibly a powerful technique is that when a kid comes with an anxiety, what we tend to do is we just say, no, don't worry, that won't happen. Well, what if we said like, well, what if it did happen? What would you do? And we actually play through the scenario. I do this with the grown-ups all the time where they're like, oh my God, if someone in my family got into a car accident, God forbid, that I wouldn't be able to handle it. And I say, well, that would be really tragic. And I really hope that doesn't happen. But let's play this through. Let's not be afraid of thinking it through. This is what we do for worries. Okay, what if someone did get into a car accident? What would happen next? What would you do next? How would you handle it? Who would support you? What would you do? I'm not wishing it on you. God forbid. And you could handle it. So and it comes back to my reminding myself, we live in a society that is safer, cleaner, people live longer than ever before. There's much less, risk of war, thank God here, not in other places, and other things. And so we're not used to that kind of tragedy on a regular basis. So when we're faced with it, it's that much scarier. But the reality of the human condition is that we are all going to die. And bad things are going to happen to us along the way. And the best case scenario for our life is that we will have a disability at some point. right? Because if we don't, that means we died suddenly. And all those things, and we're going to lose people we care about, and we're going to lose a job, and we're going to fail a test. That is all the reality of life. And to the extent that we can say, oh, I'm not seeking those things out. Oh no, I would rather they didn't happen. And I know they're going to happen, and I have confidence that I can deal with them when they come. And so that reality of like life is filled with tragedy, and life is, and our job is to appreciate the times that we have and to deal with the times where we have those difficulties, to come together as a community with other friends. And this is Judaism is so good at this, at really building community in times of stress and also in times of simcha, and also in times of joy. That also is very fortifying. We even talk about the power of, we're talking about individually, but in community, it's so much more powerful to do that together. And that's really what happens when your friend says to you, like, I'm really feeling anxious. They're really looking for community and friendship. And that is incredibly powerful to mitigate the effects of anxiety, because when we're in tight communities, we can all bolster that together.
Yes, well, we talk a lot in Moving Traditions about just the protective factors, having educators and teachers that care about the lives of teens, having teens who support each other in the ways that you're speaking of. Those are the protective factors. So I just want to say again, thank you to all of you for really deepening this conversation. I want to say also that, as I mentioned before, Lauren is part of the Meyer Gottesman Kol Kolenu Teen Feminist Fellowship. Tova is part of the J Girls Plus magazine. We don't have a representative tonight from Kumi, but I wanted to let people know that Kumi is still open for applications. And if you know a teenager who is interested in the unique nature of Kumi, which is a program that brings Jews of color together with allies and talks about that other aspect of identity. That is a wonderful opportunity, and please take a look at what we have on our website about Kumi. And it's at this point where we are going to thank you. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions that we had in the chat, but we are going to close out the night with some words of Torah. And it's my honor to pass the floor to my colleague, Rabbi Tamara Cohen, to help us digest everything that we heard and turn our attention to the days ahead tomorrow.
Okay. Lauren, do you want to say one more thing before I go?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to talk about Kol Kolenu. Well, as you said before, community and being around friends and other people has definitely personally helped me relieve my anxiety, especially with Kol Kolenu. I found that being in something like that, I can be accepting group where you can just feel like you belong and feel like yourself, has really taken me out of my head and just more in the moment. And I appreciate everything that Kol Kolenu also teaches me about mental health and Judaism. And yeah, I just wanted to add that it's definitely helped me with
Thank
my
you.
anxiety.
Thank you. Not much to add, but just as we're looking at the high holidays next week, one of the things that comes to my mind is the way that our traditions and holidays can sometimes unintentionally be sources of additional anxiety. Getting ready on time, cooking everything, getting dressed in maybe a piece of clothing that we really don't want to wear. Remembering this from my childhood, certainly. And I want to encourage us all to just take a moment of intention to think about how we can enter this season in a way that really turns down the temperature on those kinds of things about making it all perfect, and turns up the opportunity to really just be present with each other. And particularly two of my favorite parts of the upcoming holidays are Tashlich and sitting in the sukkah, because we know that being outside in nature, feeling the change of the seasons, being by running water with one another, can be an opportunity to relax, to ground ourselves, to re-regulate, and notice the way that change happens, that trees break and continue to to regenerate. And so I wish us all that the opportunity to take the wisdom of the seasons and of the tradition and of this time, to be with one another with the courage to face our fears, and also to bring joy and calm to one another in a troubling time, but also a time of still so many blessings. As Dr. Yoni Schwab said, we still are living in a time of many blessings. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to Laura, Lauren, and Tova, and to you, all of you who are here.
Thank you so much, Tamara. So we are a learning organization. We always want to learn. And so we are going to be asking you for your feedback from tonight. Please give us some feedback. Also, we have another webinar scheduled for parents for the part of the Raising Up Teens series, and this one is specifically on anti-Semitism in teens. That is going to feature a professor from Brandeis University, Dr. Jonathan Craster, who also happens to be a Moving Traditions board member, and that will be moderated by our CEO, Shuli Karkowski. And I just want to say to everyone, thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you to Dr. Yoni Schwab. Thank you to Lauren and for Tova for sharing your experience and really being an incredible role model for many young people in the work that you do in the world. And finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone who helped produce this webinar, to Rosie, to Deborah, to Brian, to Lisa, to Tamara, all my wonderful colleagues who make this possible, and look forward to seeing you at our next Raising Up Teens. Good night.
Anxiety, I feel it quite silence me. Can't shake it off of me and my anxiety. Solo, no mojo, unhappy, no logos. Think I need a smuggler up to shine my cutler. Shout out to OD next thing. My life is a nice thing. I tried to escape. You only get one take. In 3. Anxiety, I feel it quite silence me. Shake it off of me. Is my no limits, new world order. Hello, run from Pope at Rojo. I get this tight.